There are 370,000 homeowners associations in America. For James Carter, only one mattered, the one whose president called the police on him for trespassing in his own neighborhood. What she didn't know was that James wasn't just a resident. He was the reason every house, including hers, existed at all. James Carter was the visionary developer behind the exclusive gated community of Cedar Ridge. Lisa Brennan was its fiercely protective HOA president. Their clash would expose how the very tools designed to protect a neighborhood, covenants, gates, and police calls, can be weaponized to enforce a different, darker kind of order. This is what happened when the man who built the dream came face to face with the woman who guarded its gate. James Carter didn't just build houses, he built a community. A self-made developer from Atlanta, his vision for Cedar Ridge was born from a simple idea: create a beautiful, safe haven where professional families of any background could build wealth and stability, the American dream, with a welcome mat for everyone. He broke ground in 2008. The financial crisis had cratered the market, but James saw opportunity. He bought the sprawling, wooded parcel at a discount, convinced that when the economy rebounded, people would crave security and community. He designed every model home himself, selecting the stone facades, the copper lanterns, the wide, welcoming porches. He insisted on a community park, a swimming complex, and walking trails that connected every cul-de-sac. And yes, he included a homeowners association, a sensible framework, he believed, to maintain standards and protect everyone's investment. The original covenants, which James personally reviewed, prohibited obvious nuisances, leaving trash cans out, parking boats on lawns, excessive noise. They were meant to be a baseline of mutual respect. He sold the first phase to a diverse group of doctors, engineers, and teachers. The community thrived. By 2012, Cedar Ridge was the most sought-after development in the county. James, feeling his work was complete, sold the last parcels and moved on to new projects. He kept one lot for himself, a wooded corner plot at the end of a quiet lane, as a sentimental anchor and a future retirement spot. He paid his HOA dues on time every year, but otherwise remained in the background, a satisfied founder watching his creation flourish from a distance. This is where Lisa Brennan entered the picture. She and her husband purchased a premium lot in the second phase in 2014. A former corporate compliance officer, Lisa found her calling not in her new home, but in the HOA's governance documents. She saw not guidelines, but a system. She attended every meeting, meticulously noting violations. She rallied a cohort of newer homeowners who shared her zeal for protecting property values. Within 2 years, she was elected president. Under Lisa, the HOA transformed. Maintenance fees rose 20%. The Architectural Review Committee, once flexible, became a gatekeeper of aesthetic purity, rejecting paint colors deemed too bold and landscaping plans that weren't cohesive. The monthly newsletter began featuring friendly reminders that escalated to warnings, then fines. But the most significant change was psychological. A culture of suspicion took root. Residents were encouraged to report suspicious activity and unauthorized persons. The community's security gate, a symbol of safety, became a tool for scrutiny. James, busy with projects across the state, barely noticed the shift at first. He'd visit his vacant lot occasionally, walking the woods, imagining his future home. He was just another black man in casual clothes, wandering the pristine streets. He began to notice the looks, the polite, tight smiles from residents who didn't recognize him, the occasional slow-rolling security car. He shrugged it off. He was the architect of this place. He belonged. The incident that changed everything was absurd in its simplicity. It was a Saturday afternoon in late May. James had met a potential landscaping contractor at the lot. After their discussion, he decided to take a stroll through the community to see how the mature trees he'd planted were filling in. He was wearing a simple navy polo and khakis, his hands in his pockets, admiring the blooming crepe myrtles. Lisa Brennan was conducting what she called her weekly perimeter inspection. From her white SUV, she saw a man she didn't recognize. He wasn't walking a dog. He wasn't with a family. He was just observing. In her mind, the protocol was clear. She pulled up beside him and lowered her window. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. James turned, offering a mild smile. "Just enjoying the day. It's a beautiful neighborhood." "It is," Lisa agreed, not returning the smile. "Are you visiting a resident?" "In a manner of speaking," James said. "I own the lot at the end of Sycamore Lane." Lisa's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew every homeowner, every tenant. The file for the Sycamore Lane lot showed an LLC name, Carter Holdings. She had never connected it to a face. In her experience, people who claimed to own property but didn't live there were often contractors, squatters, or scouts for potential burglaries. And this man, despite his calm demeanor, did not fit the profile of a Cedar Ridge homeowner as she understood it. "I'll need to see some identification," she stated, her hand resting on her phone, "and verification of that ownership. We've had issues with trespassing." James felt a first, cold trickle of disbelief. "I'm sorry. You want my ID for walking on a public street within a community I built." His use of the word "built" sounded like a grandiose evasion to Lisa. "The streets are private, maintained by HOA dues. Please, sir, just comply so we can clear this up, or I will need to call security to assist." The confrontation drew attention. A neighbor across the street paused while watering flowers. James, to avoid a scene, reached for his wallet. He showed his driver's license. Lisa compared the name, James Carter, to the LLC on her mental checklist. It could be a coincidence, a common name. She needed definitive proof. "This doesn't establish ownership," she said. "I'm going to need you to leave the premises until you can provide a property tax statement or a deed. You can email it to the HOA management company." James laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "You're kidding. You're asking me to leave my own property." "I'm asking you to follow the rules that keep everyone safe," Lisa countered, her voice rising. "Now, please, return to your vehicle and exit through the gate, or I will be forced to contact the sheriff's department for trespassing." That's when James saw it, the absolute, unshakable conviction in her eyes. She did not see a founder. She did not see a neighbor. She saw an interloper, a problem to be managed. The racial subtext of the encounter, a specter he'd always dismissed, now hung in the air, thick and undeniable. He decided to de-escalate. "Fine, I'll go." But as he turned to walk back to his truck, parked near his lot, Lisa made the call. She didn't call the private security patrol. She dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious male refusing to leave a gated community. He claims to own property but cannot verify. Yes, he's walking towards Sycamore Lane now." 10 minutes later, James was in the middle of explaining the situation to a deputy sheriff when Lisa pulled up in her SUV, a folder of HOA regulations in her hand. She presented the deputy with the bylaws about trespassing and the safety concerns of the residents. James, furious but controlled, provided the deputy with the digital deed to his lot from his phone. The deputy, after a tense few minutes, concluded no crime had been committed and left. But the damage was done. The spectacle was witnessed. The message was sent. Lisa drove off, satisfied the rule had been enforced. James stood alone on the asphalt he had paid to pave, the crushing weight of the irony settling upon him. He had built this gate. He had written the first rules, and now they had been used to treat him like a criminal in his own creation. That night, sitting in his downtown apartment, the humiliation curdled into a cold, focused resolve. He pulled out the original leather-bound master set of covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Cedar Ridge. He flipped past the rules about fence heights and mailbox styles. His finger found the page he was looking for, a clause he'd insisted on including, a vestige of his original control, buried deep in the legalese. Most HOAs had such a clause, but few ever read it. Fewer still understood its power. It was the developer's right of reversion, a legal failsafe. If the HOA was found to be acting in a manner, materially detrimental to the community's original development interests, or in violation of fair housing principles. The developer, or his assigns, retain the right to initiate a process to revoke the entire association's governing authority over the common areas and potentially retake control. Lisa Brennan had called the police to protect her neighborhood, but in doing so, she may have just triggered the unmaking of her own power. James closed the binder. The quiet war for the soul of Cedar Ridge had begun. James didn't file a lawsuit. Not yet. His first move was quieter, more surgical. He called Evelyn Shaw, a civil rights attorney known for taking on predatory HOAs. Her office had just settled a major case against a community in Texas accused of systematically excluding black families with housing vouchers. In her downtown office, surrounded by case files, Evelyn listened as James laid out the facts. He showed her the police report, the deed, and the original master covenants. "She called the sheriff on me for walking," James said, his voice steady. "But this isn't just about me. It's about what she's turned that HOA into, a private police force for her own idea of who belongs." Evelyn scanned the reversion clause. "Section 12.7, she murmured. "Developers' right to reclaim governance upon demonstration of discriminatory practice or action contrary to original community interest. This is powerful, but it's a nuclear option. To trigger it, we don't just need your incident. We need a pattern. We need to show that Lisa Brennan's leadership has created a hostile environment under the Fair Housing Act." James leaned forward. "Then we find the pattern." While James and Evelyn began their quiet investigation, life in Cedar Ridge continued under Lisa's firm hand. Bolstered by what she saw as a successful defense of the community, she doubled down. At the next HOA board meeting, she proposed a new guest verification protocol. All guests not accompanied by a resident would be required to show ID at the gate, and their license plate would be logged. The measure passed 4-1. The lone dissenting vote was from Marcus Thorne, a software engineer who had lived in Cedar Ridge since Phase 1. After the meeting, he approached Lisa. "Lisa, this is getting extreme. Logging license plates. It feels like we're building a fortress, not a neighborhood." Lisa remained impassive. "We are protecting our investment, Marcus. The incident last month proved our vulnerabilities. We must be vigilant." "The incident was the developer," Marcus countered, lowering his voice. "James Carter, I looked it up. Carter Holdings, it's him. He built my house." Lisa's smile was thin. A claim anyone could make. Until he provides proper documentation to the board, he is a potential liability. Our covenants give us the right to ensure safety. I suggest you review them. Meanwhile, Evelyn Shaw's paralegal began filing public records requests. They pulled all non-emergency police calls originating from Cedar Ridge over the past 3 years. The data was revealing. While the community represented less than 2% of the county's population, it generated over 15% of all suspicious person calls in its police district. And the descriptions followed a pattern. Black male, mid-20s, walking. Hispanic male in vehicle, circling. Unknown male of Middle Eastern appearance taking pictures. Evelyn showed James the spreadsheet. "See this? A call every 6 weeks on average, almost exclusively describing people of color. The police logs show they almost never result in an arrest or even a citation. It's just profiling, and it's using public resources to enforce private bias." James then did something simple but effective. He created a private social media group for Cedar Ridge homeowners, separate from the official HOA forum. He invited a few of the original residents he knew personally, like Marcus Thorne. The group's description was neutral, for open discussion about our community. He didn't post about his confrontation. He just asked questions. "Has anyone else had issues with guest visits being overly scrutinized?" he wrote. The floodgates opened quietly at first, then with force. Dozens of responses poured in, not from the usual HOA meeting attendees, but from the silent majority. A black cardiologist named Dr. Annika Reed shared that her brother, a law student, had been stopped and questioned for 20 minutes while visiting her, despite her calling the gate to pre-clear him. A South Asian family, the Patels, reported receiving a violation notice for having too many vehicles during a family reunion, while their white neighbors regularly hosted large parties with street parking without issue. An elderly white resident, Mrs. Gable, confessed she was afraid to let her black home health aide use the guest pass alone after hearing Lisa's rhetoric. It wasn't just racial. Lisa's HOA had fined a young couple for a non-approved playset that was identical to one in a board member's yard. They had threatened to lien the home of a resident who lost his job and was 2 months behind on dues, refusing a payment plan. The pattern was one of selective, punitive enforcement. Rules weren't just for order, they were tools for control. Marcus Thorne, armed with these stories, decided to act. He requested a special session of the HOA board to discuss community concerns about equitable enforcement. Lisa reluctantly scheduled it. The meeting was held in the clubhouse. It was packed. James Carter did not attend in person, but he watched via a live stream link Marcus provided to the private group. Lisa opened with her usual polished presentation about property values and safety metrics. Then Marcus stood. "Lisa, I have a list of concerns from over 20 homeowners." He began reading the accounts: the disproportionate police calls, the selective fining, the hostile environment for guests of color. Lisa listened, her face a mask of calm. When he finished, she steepled her fingers. "Marcus, these are anecdotes, often from residents who are themselves in violation of covenants. The board enforces the rules equally. The fact that some people choose to break them more often is not a function of bias, but of choice. As for police calls, we encourage residents to be vigilant. If that results in more calls describing individuals who statistically commit more crime, that is a matter of data, not discrimination." Her response, a deflection wrapped in coded language, ignited the room. A murmur of discontent rose, but Lisa controlled the gavel. "The board has heard these concerns. We will take them under advisement, moving to new business." The meeting was gavelled closed, but the divide in Cedar Ridge was now out in the open. As residents filed out, two distinct groups formed in the parking lot, one around Lisa, nodding in agreement, and a larger, more anxious one around Marcus. That night, Lisa Brennan made a decision. She couldn't control the private group, but she could target its perceived ringleader. The next morning, Marcus Thorne received a formal, notarized letter from the HOA's law firm. It cited a rarely enforced bylaw about conduct detrimental to harmonious community living. It accused him of fomenting discord and spreading unsubstantiated allegations that could depress property values. It demanded he cease all disparaging communications and dissolve his unofficial social group, or face fines, legal fees, and possible suspension of his community amenities. It was a classic intimidation tactic, and it worked exactly as Lisa hoped. Marcus, facing the prospect of a costly legal fight, panicked. He posted a terse message to the private group: "I've been legally advised to shut this down. Sorry, everyone." The group went dark. When James heard, his anger was cold and precise. Lisa wasn't just defending her position. She was systematically silencing opposition. This was the pattern Evelyn needed. He and Evelyn compiled a dossier: the police call logs, screenshots of the now-defunct social group posts, the threatening letter to Marcus, the original police report from James's own confrontation. They mapped it onto the legal framework of the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination in housing-related activities, including the enforcement of rules. "We have the pattern," Evelyn confirmed. "Now we trigger the clause." They sent a package by certified mail to the Cedar Ridge HOA board, to its registered management company, and to Lisa Brennan personally. It was not a lawsuit. It was a notice of developer's action pursuant to Covenant 12.7. It formally alleged that the HOA board, under Lisa Brennan's leadership, had engaged in a pattern of discriminatory enforcement and harassment that violated the original intent of the Community and Federal Fair Housing Law. It gave them 30 days to voluntarily dissolve the current board and hold new, supervised elections, or James would initiate legal proceedings to revoke the HOA's governing authority entirely. The effect was instantaneous and volcanic. Lisa Brennan called an emergency closed-door board session. She framed it as a hostile takeover by a disgruntled former vendor. "He's using race as a shield to seize control of our finances, our common areas, everything," she told the other board members. "We cannot capitulate to this extortion." She mobilized her own allies. Letters went out to the full membership, warning of a developer's greed, threatening their way of life and their property values. She hired an aggressive land use attorney, Robert Gage, known for defending HOAs against homeowner lawsuits. Gage's first move was to file a preemptive strike in county court, a petition for a declaratory judgment. He asked the judge to rule that James Carter had waived all his developer rights years ago, that the reversion clause was invalid, and that the HOA's actions were lawful and protected. The battle lines were now drawn in legal filings. Cedar Ridge was the battlefield, and the first skirmish would be in a courtroom in just 21 days. But James had one more card to play, one he hadn't even told Evelyn about yet. While everyone was focused on the legal war, he made a visit to the county record's office. He wasn't just looking at his own property. He was pulling the original plat maps, the bonds posted for community infrastructure, and the final engineering signatures. He was looking for a mistake, a shortcut, a single thread that, if pulled, could unravel everything Lisa was trying to protect. He remembered the frantic rush to get the final phase approved before a zoning change. He remembered the county inspector being overwhelmed, and he had a strong suspicion that the pristine streets of Cedar Ridge were built on a foundation that was not quite as perfect as they appeared. The county record's office was a time capsule. As James Carter sifted through brittle, oversized pages of the original Cedar Ridge plat maps, he wasn't looking for a loophole. He was looking for a signature. And when he found it, he realized the battle wasn't just about rules. It was about a lie buried in the very dirt of the community. In the rush to finalize the last phase before a zoning change, the project's lead engineer, a man named Richard Vale, had been overworked. James remembered Vale's exhaustion. The final set of engineering stamps and signatures on the drainage and roadway plans for Phase 3 looked correct at a glance. But James, who had reviewed thousands of such documents, noticed a discrepancy. The signature on the critical geotechnical report, the one certifying the soil stability for the entire western section of Cedar Ridge, including the very street where Lisa Brennan lived, didn't match Richard Vale's official seal on file with the state. It was a forgery. The implications were catastrophic. If the foundational engineering was fraudulent, the county's acceptance of the community's infrastructure, the streets, the sewers, the storm drains, was potentially invalid. Every homeowner's title insurance could be at risk. The HOA, responsible for maintaining that very infrastructure, was presiding over a latent time bomb. James took his discovery to Evelyn Shaw. Her face went pale. "This isn't a fair housing case anymore," she whispered. "This is fraud on a municipal scale. If this gets out, property values won't just dip, they could collapse." "We don't make it public," James said, his strategy shifting. "We use it as leverage. We give Lisa Brennan a choice, a quiet, negotiated settlement to step down and reform the HOA, or we take this to the county and the press, and her house becomes unsellable." Evelyn sent a carefully worded letter to Lisa's attorney, Robert Gage. It did not mention the forged signature directly. It stated that new material evidence concerning the validity of Phase 3 infrastructure approvals has come to light, and suggested that, given the circumstances, a swift settlement to avoid broader community destabilization was advisable. They expected panic. They expected a call to negotiate. They did not expect Robert Gage's response. He filed an addendum to his existing lawsuit, accusing James Carter of fraudulent origination of the community and attempted blackmail. He attached Evelyn's letter as evidence of a threat. The legal battle had just escalated from a dispute over rules to a fight over the very legitimacy of the neighborhood's existence. The hearing for the declaratory judgment was a media circus. News vans lined the county courthouse. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Lisa Brennan sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly coiffed, projecting wounded authority. James and Evelyn sat across the aisle. Judge Anita Flores, a no-nonsense jurist known for her impatience with posturing, called the room to order. Robert Gage presented his case first. James Carter was a developer who had sold his interests and was now using a technicality and false accusations of racism to bully his way back into control. He painted Lisa as a devoted volunteer protecting homeowners from a greedy former vendor. Then Evelyn Shaw stood. She did not lead with the engineering documents. She led with the people. She called Marcus Thorne to the stand. Under oath, Marcus described the silencing letter, the climate of fear. She entered the police call logs into evidence. She called Dr. Annika Reed, who testified about her brother's detention. With each witness, the pattern Lisa dismissed as anecdotes solidified into a damning record. When it was Robert Gage's turn to cross-examine, he tried to attack their credibility. "Isn't it true, Mr. Thorne, that you were behind on your dues?" Marcus admitted he had been, once, during a medical crisis, and that the HOA had refused a payment plan. Gage moved on, but the point backfired. It highlighted the HOA's lack of compassion. Then Gage called Lisa Brennan to the stand. She was poised, rehearsed. She spoke of safety, property values, and her duty. Then Evelyn Shaw rose for cross-examination. "Ms. Brennan, is it the policy of the Cedar Ridge HOA to encourage residents to call the police on people they don't recognize?" "We encourage vigilance," Lisa corrected. "Of the 42 suspicious person calls from Cedar Ridge in 3 years, 38 described people of color. Is that vigilance, or is that profiling?" "I cannot control how residents describe individuals," Lisa said coolly. "But you can control the message. After the incident with my client, did you tell the board that the potential liability had been handled?" "I did." "You referred to James Carter, the developer who built your home, as a potential liability." The courtroom stirred. Lisa shifted. In that moment, his presence was unverified and disruptive. Evelyn let the answer hang. Then she changed tack. "Who is responsible for maintaining the streets and storm drains in Cedar Ridge?" Lisa seemed confused by the question. "The HOA, through homeowner dues." "And if those streets and drains were built without proper county certification, would that concern you as president?" Robert Gage shot up. "Objection, relevance." Judge Flores overruled. "The witness may answer." Lisa's confidence wavered. I'm not an engineer. The county approved everything." Evelyn nodded. "No further questions." The judge did not rule from the bench. She took the matter under advisement, stating a ruling would come within 10 days. The legal battle was in a tense pause, but the war in the neighborhood was reaching a fever pitch. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. "Battle for Cedar Ridge. Discrimination claims pit founder against HOA." It detailed the police calls, the social media group, the lawsuit. For the first time, the wider community saw the fracture. Homeowners were furious, but not at who Lisa expected. Dozens of residents, their property values now publicly tied to a discrimination scandal, began demanding her resignation. The HOA's management company, fearing liability, sent a warning letter to the board about the costs of the lawsuit. Lisa's base of support began to crumble. Then the anonymous package arrived at the newsroom. It contained a copy of the questionable geotechnical signature, circled, alongside Richard Vale's real signature. A note typed read, "Ask where your foundation is." A reporter called James for comment. He had no choice but to confirm he'd found a discrepancy and had alerted the HOA's lawyer. The story exploded. Foundation fraud alleged in exclusive community. Now, every homeowner was confronting a nightmare. Their safe investment might be built on a legal and physical fault line. Lisa Brennan's phone rang incessantly. Angry neighbors, reporters. One call was from the county building inspector's office, announcing a preliminary review of the Phase 3 paperwork. Her perfect world was unraveling. In a final, desperate move, she called an emergency meeting of the full HOA membership. She would face them directly. The clubhouse was overflowing, the air thick with anxiety and anger. Lisa stood at the podium, her usual composure gone, replaced by defiant agitation. "We are under attack," she declared, "by a man who wants to destroy everything we've built to satisfy his own ego. These allegations are smoke screens." But the crowd was not with her. A man stood up and shouted, "You called the cops on the guy who built our houses. You brought this on us." Another yelled, "My realtor just called. A buyer backed out because of the news." Chaos erupted. The gavel banging was useless. In the middle of the shouting, a figure walked through the back doors of the clubhouse. James Carter. The room fell into a stunned, heavy silence. He walked down the center aisle, not to the podium but to the front, turning to face his neighbors. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "I didn't want this fight," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet. "I built this place to be a home, not a fortress, not a lawsuit. Lisa called the police on me because she didn't think I belonged. That's the heart of it. And if she could do it to me, the person who laid the first stone, what does that mean for anyone else who doesn't fit a certain mold?" He looked at Lisa, who stood frozen at the podium. "The engineering issue is a problem we can fix together. But the deeper problem, the one that lets someone see a neighbor as a trespasser, that's what has to change. I don't want to dissolve the HOA. I want to reform it, to return it to what it was supposed to be, a tool for the community, not a weapon for a few." He paused, letting his words settle. "The judge will rule soon, but you don't need a judge to rule tonight. You can rule right here." He wasn't talking to Lisa anymore. He was talking to the room. The power, for the first time, had visibly and irrevocably shifted. The meeting dissolved into 100 separate, urgent conversations. Lisa Brennan gathered her papers and left the podium, her authority evaporating with every step she took toward the exit. The next morning, she received 2 letters. One was from the county, formally notifying the HOA of an audit. The other was from her own attorney, Robert Gage. Citing irreconcilable differences in strategic approach, he was withdrawing from the case. Lisa Brennan was alone. The legal ruling was still pending, but the verdict of Cedar Ridge had already been delivered. The war was over. Now came the much harder task, rebuilding what had been broken. Judge Anita Flores's ruling landed like a final, definitive stamp. In a 23-page order, she found that the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association, under Lisa Brennan's leadership, had engaged in a pattern and practice of enforcement that disproportionately targeted racial minorities, creating a hostile living environment in violation of the Fair Housing Act. The judge did not dissolve the HOA outright. Instead, she invoked the developer's reversion clause James had discovered. She ordered the immediate dissolution of the current board and appointed a temporary court-supervised committee to manage the association's affairs for 90 days. The committee's co-chairs were James Carter and Evelyn Shaw. Their mandate was clear: overhaul the governing documents, implement new enforcement policies, and supervise new, fair elections. Lisa Brennan resigned as president that afternoon. There was no dramatic statement, no apology. She removed the HOA president placard from her front lawn, deactivated the community social media accounts she controlled, and retreated behind her own door. The work of rebuilding began immediately. James's first act was not punitive. He called a community meeting in the park he designed. Hundreds of residents showed up, their faces a mix of anxiety, curiosity, and hope. "This isn't about blame," he told them, standing on a picnic table. "This is about repair. The judge gave us a chance to fix this ourselves before a county or federal receiver does it for us. We have a choice. We can be a case study in discrimination, or we can become a model for how a community rights itself." He and Evelyn laid out a three-part plan. First, they would work with the county to formally resolve the engineering signature issue. James committed Carter Holdings to fund any necessary geotechnical reviews and repairs, protecting every homeowner from financial liability. The latent fear about property values began to ease. Second, they drafted a new community equity agreement to replace the old covenants. The new document explicitly prohibited discrimination in rule enforcement. It created an independent, resident-led review panel for all fines and disputes, removing unilateral power from the board. It rewrote the guest policy, replacing mandatory ID checks with a simple host registration system. Third, and most importantly, they established a permanent, elected community relations board with real power. Its purpose was to foster inclusion, mediate disputes, and audit HOA decisions for bias. Its first members included Dr. Annika Reed, Marcus Thorne, and Mrs. Gable, the elderly resident who'd been afraid for her home health aide. The transformation was palpable. The suspicious person police calls from Cedar Ridge dropped to zero. The security gate remained, but its purpose shifted from exclusion to security for all. The newsletter now featured profiles of residents from different backgrounds, not just violation notices. The 90-day period passed in a whirlwind of meetings, drafts, and community votes. When the day for new board elections arrived, the turnout was the highest in the community's history. James Carter's name was not on the ballot. He had insisted his role was transitional. The newly elected president was Marcus Thorne. The vice president was Dr. Annika Reed. The board was diverse in age, race, and profession. For the first time, it looked like the community James had originally envisioned. Lisa Brennan's house went on the market 30 days after the election. It sold quickly, albeit for 15% less than the peak values before the scandal. She and her husband moved to another state. No further legal action was taken against her. The system had removed her from power, but it did not punish her. It was a quiet, unsatisfying end for many who had suffered under her rule, but it was the reality. The story, however, did not end at the Cedar Ridge gate. The county, prompted by the case, launched a review of police call data across all gated communities. They found similar patterns of disproportionate calls for suspicious persons in predominantly white, affluent HOAs. A new training program for deputies, focusing on implicit bias and the weaponization of police for private disputes, was implemented. Evelyn Shaw used the legal precedent from the case to pursue two other similar actions against HOAs in the region, forcing systemic reforms. James found himself consulting with other developers, urging them to build stronger protective clauses and equity frameworks into their original covenants. A year after the confrontation, James finally broke ground on his long-delayed retirement home on the wooded lot at the end of Sycamore Lane. The crew broke ground on a Tuesday morning. Neighbors, not out of obligation but genuine warmth, stopped by with coffee and welcome baskets. Marcus Thorne came by after work, beer in hand, to watch the foundation being poured. As the sun set, James stood with Marcus, looking at the skeletal outline of his future home against the trees he'd preserved. "You know," Marcus said, "for a while there, I thought this place was broken beyond repair, that the suspicion was just baked into the brick and mortar." James shook his head. "Houses don't have prejudice, Marcus. People do, and people can change. The structure just gave some folks a megaphone. We had to change the structure." The final, surprising detail emerged not in a courtroom, but in a quiet act of reconciliation. When James received the first annual financial audit from the new HOA board, he noticed a line-item adjustment. The board had voted unanimously to reimburse him, in full, for all the HOA dues he had paid during the years Lisa Brennan was president. The memo line on the check read, "For services rendered restoring our community's soul." He didn't cash it. Instead, he endorsed it over to the newly created Cedar Ridge Community Scholarship Fund, established to help children of residents attend college. The cycle of exclusion had been broken, replaced by a cycle of investment. Cedar Ridge did not become a utopia. Disagreements over lawn care and parking still occurred, but now they were mediated by a system designed for fairness, not fear. The gate no longer symbolized who was kept out, but what was protected within, a shared commitment to a better way of living together. James Carter's fight had started with a walk. It ended with a community learning how to walk forward together. The power had not just been inverted, it had been redistributed, democratized, and ultimately healed. The story of Cedar Ridge is more than a satisfying reversal. It's a stark map of a system present in thousands of American communities, a system where the authority to protect can be twisted into the power to exclude. Homeowners associations were created to maintain standards and preserve value, but without vigilant oversight and a commitment to true fairness, they can become the legal architecture for modern-day segregation. They can encode bias into bylaws, weaponize courtesy into control, and turn a gate into a border. James Carter's victory was not just personal, it was procedural. He didn't win by shouting louder, he won by knowing the rules better than those who wielded them. He used the system's own hidden levers, the forgotten clause, the public record, the weight of evidence, to force it to live up to its own stated ideals. The real power wasn't in being the developer, it was in being the most prepared person in the room. This case leaves us with a lingering question. How many other communities are operating on autopilot, governed by fear instead of fellowship, where the original dream has been quietly subverted? The answer is likely in the hundreds, but the solution, as Cedar Ridge shows, is not in abolishing these communities, but in reclaiming them. It requires residents who are willing to read the fine print, to question selective enforcement, and to speak up when a neighbor is made to feel like a stranger. It is a reminder that the landscape of belonging is not fixed by bricks and mortar, but by the choices of the people who live within them. A neighborhood's character isn't defined by its strictest rule, but by its most compassionate exception. If you found this story of hidden power and quiet justice compelling, leave a like to support this channel, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the unseen structures shaping our everyday lives. I've selected 2 more stories about ordinary people confronting extraordinary systems, waiting for you on the screen now. Thanks for watching.